Network Entertainment.
Welcome to Now Steaming, where we dish out hot takes as millennial Tsinoys. My name is Stan C, and I'm joined as always by one of my co-hosts, one of my collaborators. This is Kimberly Mas of So Asian Comics. Hey, Kim.
Hi, Stan. I know you guys are missing out on like one more voice here. Said, aka my fiance. Oh, I can actually say that.
Oh, pwede na sabihin.
Pwede na sabihin. Yeah. Wala siya dito because he's not feeling so well today. Wala siyang voice. So obviously I said, you can't record today. So ako lang at si Stan muna. And it's funny, like you mentioned Tsinoy millennials. Parang I was looking at our topic. Okay, and I was like, wow, ito pa rin ba yung pinag-uusapan ng mga Tsinoy? Ganon na ba tayo katanda?
Yeah, because when we call ourselves millennial Tsinoys or Tsinoy millennials, it's actually much older now than we used to think. Kasi now we are talking about stuff like business, we're talking about getting married in your case, diba? Or in my case, I got married last year. Or in today's episode, diba? We're gonna talk about mana, inheritance. And this is the type of stuff that as a kid, you're like, that's adult problems. And then now you realize, oh wait, I'm now an adult. This is now my problem.
No, and it's funny because meron ng bagong generation ngayon. I don't know if you've seen that on social media because it's millennials, then you have the Gen Z, and then now you have like a new generation.
Yung Gen Alpha, yeah.
Gen Alpha.
And then yung mga kids to be born this year, that's Gen Beta. So diba? So the generations are quickly coming upon us, and we're getting much older and older. And to help break down yung topic of inheritance and how it affects Tsinoy families, we've invited a very special guest to join us for this episode of Now Steaming. He's a good friend of mine. We go back almost 2 decades at this point.
Wow.
He is also one of the founding partners of Sky Law, one of the up-and-coming law firms here in Metro Manila. Please welcome to the show, Attorney Kesterson Kua.
Hi, Stan. Hi, Kim. Thank you for having me here. It's a pleasure. It's an honor.
Yeah. Kes, I'm so happy that you can sit down with us and join us for this conversation. But for our listeners who are hearing your name and hearing about Sky Law for the first time, can you give us a quick intro?
Yeah, so Sky Law is a relatively young law office. We've been here for around 5.5 years. Personally, I specialize in corporate law, but I also specialize in family law, which is probably why I was invited here today. So looking forward to a great talk this afternoon.
Yeah. For those who are checking out the podcast or hearing Kester's voice for the first time, he actually went viral during COVID time. Kasi nung pandemic, everyone is making content, diba?
Was this like TikTok?
No, not necessarily TikTok. He was posting videos of himself speaking in Hokkien about law for yung mga aunties and uncles.
Yo, that is such a huge market.
Help breaking down this type of stuff. Diba? Why are you ashamed of it? It's actually good stuff. My dad became a fan of you because of that.
Thank you.
So what did you think about like posting a video in Hokkien? Was it, an auntie asked you about something law related and it's in Hokkien, so you figured, might as well post this?
Well, actually, it began because when the pandemic hit and we were under ECQ, Metro Manila was under ECQ at the time, diba? So for the next, I think the first 2 or 3 days of ECQ, people kept calling me and asking me the same questions over and over again.
Which were,
are we, number one, is it true we can't open? Number two, what about our employees? Do we have to pay them? Number three, like what happens to our rentals, our obligations, bank interest, for example? So they kept calling me for like the first 2 or 3 days. And then paulit-ulit yung tanong. To the point that I was not having enough sleep. I was stressed. I was exhausted.
With all the questions.
Because of all the questions. It just so happens, my family had a lot of family friends. So I decided, why not just make a FAQ on video that could be shared by people so that they won't, call me.
Right. So very selfish yung nature, but it actually was selfless. Kasi marami namang natulungan, di ba?
Yeah, very, very thankful for that. I really made the video just for my organizations. That was really it. I just sent it to my organizations with no idea, no expectations, absolutely nothing. No idea that it would go viral.
Syempre, aimed yan sa mga Tsinoy uncles and aunties. And ang tambayan nila is Facebook. So malamang sa malamang magva-viral yan. I'm sure nag-viral din sa Viber.
Actually, more on Viber.
Dinownload na nila yung video and they
shared it.
Ito yung mga sinesend eh. Tapos siguro, sometimes I ignore it. I'm like, it might have been one of your videos pala.
I say Viber is the playground of the Chinoy uncles and aunties.
Oh, yeah.
It's the new Mahjong Hall.
If not Facebook, it's Viber.
It's Viber.
Right? So that's one of the reasons why matunog din yung pangalan ni Kester sa Chinoy community, especially over the last half decade. Man, it's been 5 years since COVID time. But anyway, we're not gonna go there. We're gonna talk about families and inheritances and how yung mga mana really gets in the way of our dynamics sa mga Chinoy families. And I guess to start with all of this, no, I want to ask about whether or not yung agawan ng yaman, for lack of a better term, is that an inherently Chinoy-only issue or is that something that goes outside of the community rin? Kasi, di ba, yung stereotype is, Chinoy kayo, mayaman. Chinoy kayo, pag may namatay ng elder generation, magkakawatak-watak yung family because of mana.
Okay, very great question. Definitely, very clear answer, no. Okay, it's not a Chinoy thing. It's not limited to Chinoys. I believe it's a human thing. It affects everyone. We have clients from other cultural backgrounds, Filipinos, Americans, Japanese. Everyone faces the same questions after death. How do we divide our parents' estate? Of course, and of course the problem is unmet expectations. I think that's something that I really wanted to share today, Stan and Kim. A lot of people say people fight because people are greedy, because swapang, they want more than what they deserve. Well, yes, that's true, but we have to ask a deeper question, which is why are they greedy in the first place? Why are they swapang? Why are they looking for more? And oftentimes, not all the time, but oftentimes we see, or I see in my profession, that it's because of unmet expectations. And these unmet expectations actually started, with the parents themselves. Miscommunications, promising one thing and then delivering another.
Yeah.
Okay.
Or having favoritism in the family.
Okay.
Wow, that is really the cause of so much unmet expectations, which later on, of course, turn to greed, and which, as we all know, greed can make people do very untoward and sometimes illegal things.
Right. So, yung unmet expectations is actually a general thing, diba? Now that you've put it that way, regardless of whatever your ethnicity is, I think we can all relate to that. But why do you think yung issue ng agawan ng mana or agawan ng yaman is portrayed in media that involve Chinoys? For example, the very first Mano Po movie, diba, actually had a plot around yung mana. Whereas you didn't really see that in like the Mula sa Pusos or Pangako Sayos or Mara Claras of the 90s.
Wait, just to add something also, like that's not only like visible in movies. You can also see it like on newspapers sometimes if there's like a really big case.
Na-sensationalize.
Na-sensationalize. And it's almost all the time, Chinoys.
Okay, well, for me, two things yan. Number one, it goes with the rise of the Chinoy community in nation building in general. It's during those times, 80s, 90s, now that, our businesses are growing. Our elders, most of us are maybe third generation, second generation, fourth generation. The businesses are growing, so now we're on the spotlight. That's number one. And then number two, I think more importantly, number two is the fact that our culture, the Philchai culture, is very money-centric. It's very business-centric, okay? I don't mean it in a bad way. It's just how our culture works. Like, for example, how do we even introduce ourselves? Or at least the older generation. How do they introduce themselves?
This is name, profession.
Name, profession.
Or business.
Exactly, business.
Or I think, just to add a little bit of like humor to all of this like serious conversation, even in Kaishaos.
Correct.
Like, I think
that's
we
true.
talked
Correct.
about this in another episode na they'll mention their name, their occupation, and then yung family business, how many employees even. I'm like, what even? So it's like
because it's our identity.
Yeah.
Diba? Especially with the older, well, not really older, pero a little bit older than us. That's how they introduce themselves. Diba? Parang, they in fact, oftentimes they don't even remember people's names. If it's an acquaintance, they remember what the business
is. Yeah.
Right.
Oh, I know the owner of blank.
Ah,
Diba?
tama,
It's usually like that.
But they don't know the first name.
Yes.
Usually last name kung swerte ka, di ba? Malala na kunwari, may hardware store sa Binondo, di ba? Si Tan or Ong yung apelido nila, ganyan, but not really the first name.
And that's why it's so common for us for the older generation to say, Dila Suecia.
Yeah.
What do you do? Right? Because unfortunately, that's how we base our identities traditionally, of course. So that might be the reason why inheritance becomes such a big issue, because it oftentimes relates to business. And our businesses may be a little bit more popular, and the family is identified with it. So any problem with the family immediately becomes a business problem.
So, ano yung mga common na nirereklamo ng mga clients mo? Like, yung pain points that they want your help with? Kasi you already mentioned unmet expectations, and I think that's the pinaka-umbrella of it all. But if you want to make it more direct siguro as an example?
Okay, definitely equal division. How do you divide the inheritance? If you're going to go with traditional Chinese, with like extremely traditional Chinese culture, a married daughter does not get anything. Right? Because a married daughter, once she receives her ketsang or her dowry, traditionally, that's it. That's your inheritance.
Yeah.
So anything in excess will be left to the sons, right? So how do you now, like one of the biggest issues I often face is, how do you deal with a family who claims tradition, but unfair naman yung division? It's very common. And then
What do you mean by unfair yung division? Like one son or one child gets more than the other?
Yes, the eldest son gets like a Herculean portion of the inheritance.
It's like a generational thing, right? Like especially for the more traditional Chinoy families. I think it has like so much weight. Especially this is my late grandfather. Like he would always like put a lot of weight on my dad. He's the eldest. Every time, he would introduce like, this is my eldest son all the time. Even though he has like 4 other sons. So there's things like that.
And that poses an impact not only at the time of death or a time of distribution, but actually you see that growing up. And that's where dun nagsisimula eh.
Yung resentment.
And the inferiority complex.
Oh yeah.
It starts there. Yeah.
So what you're pointing at now is parang mga it's a psychological problem, if you could call it that. Kasi
psychological,
emotional, mental baggage, diba?
Oh.
Emotional baggage na dala-dala ng mga anak, and then at the time of division, or if you want to put it plainly, time of death ng parent or a grandparent, lalabas siya in this way.
Correct.
Do you think that there's a link to yung generational trauma ng Chinese Filipinos? Because our ancestors, a lot of them were immigrants, diba? Who came to the Philippines with virtually nothing. So do you think there's a link between that and then the current generations being either laki sa yaman or komportable na yung lifestyle nila?
Definitely, there's a big cultural gap there. In terms of lifestyle, you often see that na because the younger generation is now living such a carefree life, the older generation is not generally happy with them, diba?
Yeah.
And so they favor one specific child that would maybe align more closely with their values, despite the fact that all of them are their children. And legally, under the law, in the absence of a will, estates or your estates in general should be divided equally among
Regardless kung men
regardless
or women
of male,
or
female,
married.
eldest. Yeah, those are irrelevant. The fact that they are your children, in the absence of a will, in the absence of a last will, it should be divided equally.
Well,
and oftentimes, Philchai families are not able to differentiate the two hats of a business owner. Okay, because business owners can be both there are two hats in business. Okay, one hat is you're a shareholder. Another hat is that of an employee or an officer of the corporation. Okay, those are two different hats. So hindi naiisip ng older generation that it's possible for all their children to actually be co-owners of the business. But and here's the big deal, not everyone should be managing the business. Doon nagsisimula yung away. If everyone is managing the business and then they have different, ideas, doon sila mag-aaway. If we're talking about the business, syempre if we're talking about properties na specific, a big problem there is valuation. How do you value a property? A property in Corinthians is worth what? 300, 400 million. Tapos yung ibang properties, maybe in the provinces, not as valuable. Doon magkaka-issue.
So kahit na sabihin mo kunwari na tatlo silang anak, tatlong lupa, pero yung isa nasa Corinthians, yung dalawa nasa probinsya.
Patay ka. Oo. Tapos ang problem, wala nang pera, wala nang ibang property na pwedeng idagdag.
Right.
Diba? And truth, eto, eksakto. To your example, Stan, I have a client specifically in that situation. There's one major house in an exclusive neighborhood, then no other significant assets. No other significant assets. So ano ginawa ng parents? The parents made all... the parents distributed the main house to the eldest son, and then the smaller properties are not so relevant to the other children.
So nagkaaway-away.
Nagkaaway talaga.
So it went to like a court and everything.
Pero buhay pa yung parents or patay na sila by then?
Patay na.
Okay.
While the parents are alive, no one dares, as in not even a squeak. But after death, that's when the horns come out.
Yeah, it's weird that I was talking to a friend about this, like a fellow Tsinoy friend, and we were talking about bakit ba hindi tinatanong well they're still alive, right? And I feel like it's such a taboo. And at the same time, for me naman, it's practical that you ask it, right? Because everybody eventually is gonna die. For me.
Pero syempre the older generation sasabihin nila, don't talk about me as if I'm dead na. Kasi diba, parang bad juju yan or whatever.
And this is actually one of the main reasons why Phil-Chai families have a problem. And that it's because the older generation is in denial. That's really it. They're in denial. I'll be the first one to say it. A lot of clients approach me, attorney, how do we resolve this problem? I tell them, you have to wake your parents up. You have to tell them na there is a problem. Because oftentimes the older generation is saying, this is, you just divide it equally among yourselves, and then wag kayo mag-away, yan yung utos ko, wag kayo mag-aaway sa pera. Not
easier said than done.
Oh, exactly.
Diba? It's easy not to fight if it's just maybe 100,000, 500,000. Sige na, sabihin mo na hanggang 1 million, Stan. Di ako makipag-away sa'yo. Kapag kapatid kita. Pero paano pag 20 million?
Patay.
Diba? Kim, paano pag 50 na?
What more
pag
kung higher,
500?
diba?
Or 1 billion?
So what do you think about that? Yung fact nga na they are in denial. Like how many of the clients that you've dealt with actually wake up and realize na, hey, we do have to talk about this habang buhay pa sina ama, angkong, etc.
Alam mo, if confronted and tactfully confronted, most of them wake up. That's the truth. Most of them wake up. If it is tactfully confronted, and ang sabi ko dyan parate, it cannot come from the children directly. It has to come from, the message has to come from a common friend of their generation.
Yeah.
Hindi pwedeng ikaw anak, then you're gonna tell your dad, you need to settle our estate, etc. Magagalit ka. Magagalit yun. Mamumura ka lang.
Oh, I think, attorney, I guess for everybody listening here, what's the best way to approach this situation? Kasi parang, let's say, obviously they can't say it as kids. How do they kind of like massage yung common friend or maybe somebody close to the family to actually bring up the topic? Kasi yun nga, in denial, most of these elder Chinoys.
Yeah, so definitely, first step yan, look at your relatives. If they are in good terms, if your parents are in good terms with their brothers and sisters, approach them. Is there anyone there that is a little bit more open-minded? Okay? Unfortunately, oftentimes, hindi, no? Relatives mahirap. So, you go to the next level, godparents. Because these are the people that your parents chose either for you or for your wedding, diba? So, they respect them in some level. So, look at your godparents, see who among your godparents is actually open-minded and plan for their future. Doon marami. Pagdating sa godparents level, ang dami ng godparents who, are actually doing estate planning. And
this is surprising to hear. Pero what if wala? Sabihin natin wala. Kasi posible, di ba?
Pag wala talaga, then look at other friends. And if talagang wala, one thing we did with one of our clients is they brought the parents to one of my talks. Because I normally give talks on succession and estate planning on different associations. they brought them to one of my talks that I would give in Chinese. And Hokkien is such a magical language.
Yeah.
It is, right?
Yeah.
Because when you start speaking Hokkien to the older generation, suddenly everything you say is full of gravitas and so believable. Versus if you spoke to them in Tagalog or in English, it's different.
Yun yung magic bullet, no?
Oh, it's really the magic bullet.
So, okay, we've established na it's all about communicating to the elder generation, but communicating it in a way that they would understand. But let's say you're starting your family now, di ba? Tayo, mga millennial Chinoys, we're now in our 30s, right? So we would probably be third, if not fourth generation Chinoys. If we're starting our own families now and we have our own nest eggs, may sarili tayong wealth, for lack of a better term, and we want to avoid the pitfalls of the previous generation, where do we start?
Okay. So first, if you have kids, definitely don't play favorites. Okay? Really, you cannot play favorites. Favoritism is easily the biggest pitfall. Let me just segue a little bit here, Stan and Kim. Alam nyo, I distinctly remember one case I handled na ang laki ng pinag-aawayan. We were fighting over, I think, a 3B or a 4B estate.
Damn.
Wow.
A very big estate. And I can't name names, no? But,
Obviously.
it was a series of negotiations. We were representing the parents. So the parents engaged us.
So buhay pa sila?
Buhay pa. And the parents were very forward-thinking. They wanted to settle it while they were alive. And they wanted a distribution na all the children would be happy.
Okay.
So it was a series of meetings and conferences, around 6 or 7. And it became very apparent early on that one of the children was really not cooperating. As in, to the point that he already received more than an equal share. As in, other children already sacrificed a little bit so that he could have more just for him to sign. Ayaw. And after 6 or 7 meetings, he just broke down because I threatened him. I told him, if you don't want to settle this, then fine. I will just draft a last will for your parents and make sure that you just get the minimum. Okay? Because we were getting, frustrated. And, he kind of broke down and said, it's so unfair. Kasi si Mama and Papa, ever since naman, mas mahal si Aya, mas mahal si Atsi. I remember when I was 3 or 4 years old, Aya would go with them to Hong Kong, ako iiwan sa bahay. Ganon. And then they would even say na parang yung yaya niya, kinuha, binigay sa shoti. And he felt that. And that all came out in that session.
So it's all childhood trauma.
Childhood trauma.
Parang Pandora's box bigla.
And unfortunately, the consequence of that is his ending statement was, so no matter what you offer, I will not sign.
Damn.
Oh.
And he was already easily getting like 100 or 200 million more than the other children.
Can you share yung naging resolution? Like, how did they, figure it out?
We recommended them to a family counselor, and ultimately, after a long period, like this took around a year and a half later, they were able to reconcile, and thankfully, na-settle namin, no? But really, it took, even for that guy, very thankful that he was at least open-minded enough after the breakdown to go to counseling.
Yeah, that's huge. Not just for Chinoys, pero like an older generation, a person from the older generation to even recognize that, okay, we need counseling, we need therapy, and we're gonna go together as a family. Like that's unheard of in a Chinoy setting.
Yeah. So number 1, going back, don't play favoritisms. Number 2, we need to make sure that our children are close with each other. Like I see a lot of families. Unfortunately, my clientele tend to be well off. So,
bakit unfortunately?
Kasi they have more problems.
Okay.
And let me explain one of the reasons why they have more problems. I notice I have no academic journal to back me up, just my own experience, my own observations. Children who grow up in big mansions, in big houses with their own rooms, their own yayas, their own video game consoles. My God, these families fight. They really fight. And I realized why. Simple. Because they don't have a common interest. From the time that they were children, they would grow up separately. They would only see each other during dinner time. And if the family is not a very vocal family, there are families that are not very vocal in dinner. So they just eat they're quiet, and then they leave. There's no common interest binding them, so they don't actually know each other. They're really strangers living in the same house. They live in the same roof, but they're complete strangers. And they fight. And this happens more often with really well-off families, with big houses, and the children sleep in different rooms. That's why for me, and my second tip is, make your children close. And how do you do that? I think while your children are young, let them share a room together. Let them share a room together. Let them share a CR together. Let them share a TV together. Learn to share.
Kaya pala kami naging close ni Shobe kasi same CR kami until our 30s.
Wow. Ako hindi. Ako hindi.
Oh, lucky you. Yeah, that's why yung sink ko until I got married and moved out, hanggang tuhod ko lang.
Wow.
Never na in-adjust.
Never na in-adjust. No, going back. So, okay, first tip.
Don't play favorites.
Don't play favorites. Second is make sure your kids are close and make sure the family is well knit.
And then for those who are a bit older, maybe you're a millennial in your 20s or 30s. You don't want to have a fight with your siblings, and you want to at least try to maintain a good family relationship. I would recommend talaga a family trip. An annual family trip. It doesn't have to be fancy. It doesn't have to be an international trip. It can be as simple as a Tagaytay trip or a Baguio trip or a Boracay trip. Just carve out time to spend with each other. Okay? Because the more time you spend with each other, the more you realize that they are also people, that they are your blood relatives, and somehow, emotions start coming in. The love starts coming back in. But the more time you spend apart, then what are the chances that you could reconcile if ever there is an issue? Diba? Wala. So if there is an issue in the family, I say tackle it head first and then try to spend more time talaga. It will be awkward, but it's really the best solution.
Parents, this is your cheat code to understanding your gamer kid. This is Keri Kita, Guide for Non-Gamer Parents. I'm Ray.
And I'm Joey. Hardcore gamers, hardcore parents. Let's learn from each other. Dito,
Keri Kita.
So etong tatlong tips yung pinaka ma-recommend mo to those who are either starting their family or they're already looking ahead na parang, okay, nandito na yung mga anak ko, they're growing up, but I would like to avoid these pitfalls in the future. So with regard to the cases that you handle, how bad would it get in a practical setting? Like, siguro without being very specific, but like how bad does it really get?
Guys, what you see in the teleseries, in the movies, they're real.
That's real.
And unfortunately, I've lived through them. Number one, eto talaga, I cannot forget. I had a daughter-in-law kick out her parents-in-law.
Okay.
Out of a exclusive subdivision house in Metro Manila. Okay. You might have even heard of the case in the rumor mill. Yes, it's true. A daughter-in-law in her 40s kicked out her husband's parents from the house that the parents bought in their 70s. And this happened when the husband passed away. Because they were all living in the same house, nagka-issue. So, because we're talking about general family problems, diba? For estates naman, for succession, the most problematic and the most scandalous, children kidnapping their parents against each other. So they would get their parents, hide them in their own house, refuse access to other children, to other siblings, and then make them sign, fake wills, fake deeds of donation in their favor. It happens.
These are the things that I would read in like Crazy Rich Asians, like the entire set. And I was like, I feel like this is true, but now hearing all of this,
it's
okay,
true.
confirmed.
And it's very near Xavier and Ika.
Okay.
Geographically, very near Xavier and Ika.
Jeez. What's good, Green Hills West? So, what do you think when yung mga hindi Tsinoy nakakarinig sila ng ganitong kwento? And then it reinforces yung stereotype na, Tsinoy mayaman. Or, Tsinoy, sure yan, may mana ka namang makukuha, di ba, at some point, di ba? So, it contributes to whatever stereotype na you're well off even if that's a nest egg waiting for you down the road pa.
It does. It does generate a stereotype. But I think at the end of the day, again, it's applicable to everyone, not just Chinoys. It's more pronounced lang sa atin. Kasi, I think, yun nga, kasi we're very business-oriented. If a family fractures, oftentimes you see businesses also fracture. And the rumor mill, goes crazy.
Yeah, because maliit lang naman yung Chinoy community and then, Viber starts doing its thing. And then it just spreads like wildfire. So, yung mga tips that you shared, these are actually familiar insights to me because I've added your public lawyer Facebook profile where you actually post these things. And do people give you feedback on these insights that you share?
Yeah, thankfully, a lot of people say thank you. They appreciate it. They like to share it to others. And these insights really stand. If you notice, they're very basic. They're common sense insights. And that's really the truth kasi. To maintain harmonious relationships, it's basic. There's no special rule, there's no special technique. It's just really time and understanding, empathy. That's it.
And are these things na natutunan mo from the way that you were raised, from your own family, or from observing yung mga kliyente mo, or something you've watched or read? Where did you pick up all of these insights?
From everything. From my own life, the way I grew up. I am as I was telling Stan off the air earlier, I am the epitome of a traditional Philchai. Did everything, did all the checklists. So I had that life. And then with my lawyer life, I saw the problems that families, very well-established families, in fact, face. And at the same time, syempre, when you're trying to help clients, you have to do your own research. So I read a lot of books. And that's, I guess, where it all comes from. And it's really, people need to learn to empathize with one another.
You have a growing family yourself. You have a couple of young boys that you're raising with your wife, no? And does it ever scare you na, the things that to you are common sense today, na maybe when it's time to apply all of these things, there will be struggles. It will be difficult.
Oh, definitely. Alam mo, it keeps me awake at night sometimes. Seeing your cute little boy at 5 years old, realizing one day baka makipag-away siya sa kapatid niya over inheritance. It's very sad. Diba? It's very, very sad. And one other thing I wanted to share to everyone is, we have to, as young parents, or maybe even for the older parents, you have to understand that the responsibility is with us to make sure our children don't fight. Because who's gonna teach them if not us? Diba? And always remember, everything we work for, all this wealth, this material wealth that we work for, it's supposed to be a blessing to our children, right? It's supposed to be a blessing. So wouldn't it be the saddest thing in the world if that thing that you worked your entire life for, that wealth, instead of a blessing, it becomes the curse that separates your family. So, yeah, it's something that keeps me awake, and I think something that every parent should be very much aware of.
I'm also curious, attorney, since you mentioned a lot about it's mostly like, okay, within the family, but the question I'm gonna ask is more about like, I'm sure you've probably encountered it, you've probably heard of it, and it's under like family law. What about, let's say, may dumating na illegitimate kids, right, into the picture? How does that work? Because I don't know, is it like, are they entitled to, or is it like if the father or mother doesn't acknowledge na they're illegitimate kids, wala sila makukuha? How does that work?
Okay, so under the law is very clear. Illegitimate children are entitled to 1/2 of whatever legitimate children get.
Okay. So let's say I am a legitimate child and I get 1,500,000 yung what the illegitimate child
Correct.
is entitled to.
Correct.
Okay.
So that's under the law. So at the very least, that's what families have to respect. No? And I understand that there is a natural conflict between, the first family and potential families outside. But I urge everyone to calm down and assess the situation. Who is really at fault? Right? Was it the fault of the child? It's not, right? It's not the fault of the child. Is he biological son or daughter of your father or your mother? The answer is yes. So does he deserve it? The answer is yes. People need to calm down and assess. It's difficult, but that's a fact of life. They are still children.
How do yung mga the bereaved, 'di ba? Yung mga naulila, let's say a parent passes away and then all of a sudden out of the woodworks lumabas yung illegitimate children. How do they not resent the deceased? That's such a complicated thing to go through, 'di ba?
Yes.
Kasi you're grieving and then you realize, tangina, may ganito pala.
Nalaman mo nung
At the time of death.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
when you
And
were grieving.
It does happen, and I've heard of this story. Like not just like one person I know. It's like several people I know. Now they come up during the wake, and then boom! Oh wow, I have a half sibling. So it's just insane.
Yeah, it happens. It definitely happens. So very simple ang instructions ko if that happens. Number one, calm down. We don't want to make a scene. If there is, okay, just tell them politely, we will handle this after the wake. Okay, after the funeral, we'll handle this after the wake and after the funeral. The worst thing you can do is to react during the wake for the first family. The worst thing you can do is to react during the wake because now you will be gossip material for the entire community.
Yeah.
So don't react during the wake. Resolve it after. Now, how do you resolve it? Number one, definitely you have to verify are they really children? Are they really illegitimate children or not? Because baka hindi. Now, if they really are illegitimate children, then we have to look at our options. What is your priority? Because when we say naman na they are entitled to half, it doesn't mean half well, it is half of everything, but not half of every single thing. For example, if you want to protect the business, you don't want, outsiders going inside the business, we can do that. We can give them more cash in exchange for shares in the business.
Okay.
Or we can give them property in exchange for shares in the business. What about the ancestral house? Diba? Would you want them to have a share in that? Obviously, no. So we will give them something in return. The only important thing to remember is that they have to get something.
So yung objective nito, like all of these things na pinapayo mo, Kes, is with the objective of minimizing conflict.
Minimizing conflict. Definitely.
So, trying to get into the nitty-gritty here, just to answer a few questions our listeners might have. What should take precedence for mga Tsinoy families who are very conservative and traditional? Is it the traditional way of passing on yung inheritance, or is it Philippine law because we are in the Philippines and it's 2025?
Okay. If you ask me, definitely it has to go hand in hand. Okay? And
Not one takes precedence over
not
the
one,
other.
no.
Okay. So how does that work?
And in times of conflict, ideally, you take a look at Philippine law.
Yun muna.
Ideally, Yun muna. Kasi, if you don't follow Philippine law, no matter what you sign, the other person can still file a case against you.
Why? On what grounds?
Okay, because under failure to receive his or her legitim. Because in the Philippines, we have this concept called legitim, which it's a very fancy word for mandatory inheritance.
Okay.
Meaning every child actually is entitled to a certain portion of their families or their parents' estate. In general, the rule is you divide the estate of the person who died, the decedent. You divide it by half. Okay, that half will be divided among the legitimate children. So that is your legitim. So example, Stan, if there are two of you, two children, and then let's say the father passed away. Let's say the father has a net estate of, let's say, 100 million, just to compute easily. So 100 million, you divide it by two. One half is 50 million, right? So there are two children. Each child will now get 25 million each. That is their legitim. That is mandatory inheritance. Okay. Now, rule number 2. Illegitimate children get one half the share of a child. So the what's the share of the illegitimate child? It's 12.5, right? So 50 plus 12.5, you're at 62.5. What happens to the rest, the 37.5? That now becomes what we call the free portion. And that portion of the estate is what the parent can give out to whoever they want to without without breaking the law. So if they want to give the 37.5% all to the eldest son, then legally that's allowed. Okay, legally that's allowed. So that's what the law says. So as long as they work within that framework, that's allowed. What I tell children though, so all this time, Stan and Kim, we've been talking about, or I've been talking about how children should react, right?
Yeah.
But one other thing that children though should know, before reacting, is that we have to understand that all this money is our parents. It's not yet ours, right?
Yes.
I think a lot of people forget and just assume that they are entitled to it. There is a sense of entitlement, eh. Diba? A lot of people forget na, number one, hey, hindi pa sa'yo to. Okay? As long as your parents are alive, hindi pa sa'yo to. So, if they want to spend it all within the next year, go flying first class, buying the fanciest car that they want, and eating in, Grand Hyatt every day, they can, right? They legally can. Morally, they can also do it. And there's nothing you can do.
Kasi pera nila yun.
Pera nila yun. So, before we talk about yun nga, away, etc., we have to understand first as the heirs na it's their money. It's not ours. And ako, whenever a family approaches me, that's the first thing I tell all the children. Remember, hindi sa inyo to. If your parents all decide to use it up tomorrow because they want to, that's their right. There's nothing we can do.
Kahit na ma-exhaust yun, maging zero na yung
Correct.
net. Yeah.
Oh, in fact, kahit nga mangutang siya eh.
And leave you with debt.
Yeah, although kasi debt
that would be
cannot be
messed up.
transferred. But that cannot be transferred to the next generation.
Uh-huh.
But let's say, it
TIA.
can. Yeah.
TIL. Today I learned.
Yeah. But let's say yun nga, they decide to even, procure loans from the bank. That's their right. There's nothing we can do.
Technically, parang they're not obliged to, or they're not required to give you naman.
They're
Because
not required.
it's their money.
Yeah.
To go back to an example that you told us earlier, Kes, about yung mga division of inheritance and how if you follow yung traditional Chinese way of thinking, if you're a daughter and you're married, technically hindi ka na entitled. Pero so that's a scenario you brought up, no? What happens if they do try to claim na hindi, we're in the Philippines and as a legitimate child, I am still entitled to whatever percent that my brother is getting or that my unmarried sister is getting?
Yeah, that's true. They are entitled. And if they wanted to sue, they can actually sue. And we see that happen. We see daughters, married out and the parents pass away and suddenly they're suing their brothers for their share in the business. That happens.
How do you resolve that? Like who wins? I mean, nobody wins kasi family feud nga,
Nobody
di ba?
wins.
Pero
Nobody wins.
in the eyes of the law, sinong nananalo?
The daughter.
Yung daughter na married na.
Oo. Kasi pag hindi niya talaga nakuha yung share niya, the law and if she sues, the law will step in and the judge will say, after a very long period, the judge will say, you are entitled to this and ika-cuff out talaga.
Your specialty is family law, diba? So you deal with this literally every day. But how often do these messy cases fall on your desk?
Every week. Every week. I've had the fortunate and the unfortunate job of, observing the best and worst in people. I've seen the worst. I've seen the best. Mahirap maging tao. Yun lang masasabi ko, Stan. Mahirap maging tao. And there are also times, Stan, when it's not so clear-cut who is right and who is wrong. For example, I have a case. Two children, so you would assume the estate is equally divided,
Yeah.
diba? But hindi. The parents decided to give 70% to one child, 30% to the other. So at first glance, parang mali, unfair, diba? But then you hear the story and you realize why the parents did it. Because the other child stayed with them. In their old age, she stayed with them. She took care of them. She gave up a lot of her own dreams. She stayed with them, took care of the business, and was really a dutiful daughter. The other one naman, the son, decided to go abroad, have a family, would only come back to the Philippines once a year, despite instructions from the parents for him to come back more often because they wanted to see the grandchildren. Who's right and who's wrong in that case? diba?
So
Ang hirap.
how was that resolved? Kasi
It's not yet resolved.
Oh, it's not,
not
yet
yet
resolved. So there's no actual law kind of saying na, okay, dapat ganito yung atake for this kind of
Ang
case.
problem kasi dun sa case na yun, Kim, is walang last will and testament. Kung may last will, that would have been fine. Because
That would have been settled.
yeah, kasi the legitim is only 25%, di ba? Earlier in our
Yeah,
example, di ba? So, pag dalawang kids, ang legitim mo lang is 25%. As long as you get that, tapos na. In this case, the son would actually get 30%. So it's more than the legitim. The problem in this case is the parents did not leave a valid will, a last will and testament.
Wait, so how did they know it was like 70%?
They have a voice recording.
Oh, so is that like valid in
It's
court?
not valid.
Why not?
Because wills in the Philippines have to follow technical rules. And there are two types of wills. No? First, we have what we call a holographic will. A holographic will is the best kind of will for me. It's a very simple will. In fact, both of you can make one right now if you wanted to. Our listeners can make one right now if you wanted to. All you need to do, grab a piece of paper, grab a pen. As long as the will is handwritten fully by hand by you, and it is dated and signed by you, that's already valid.
Hindi kailangan ng photographic proof or yung video.
No need.
Basta papel.
Basta papel, pirmado, dated, and completely written
What
by
if
hand. by you.
finorge? Like how does that work? Like there are lots of cases about people forging wills. So how do you actually validate that? Do you go to
There's a handwriting expert. If there is a contention as to the veracity and the authenticity of the will, then we gather evidence to counter the authenticity. But yeah, if you wanted to make a will, it's very simple. You don't need a lawyer. A lot of people think you always need a lawyer to make a will. It's not. Just grab a piece of paper, handwritten, completely signed and dated. That's already valid.
What's the second kind?
The second kind is what we call a notarial will. Now, that is the will that movies show us. That's the will where the lawyers come into play. It has to be notarized. There are a lot more requirements, and it's so much more expensive. So, generally, I tell people, make a will. I make a will every year just to make sure.
In-update mo kasi yung
In-update,
assets and everything.
Oo, you
right?
have to update everything. But yeah, yung problem doon kanina, Kim, wala kasing last will. It was just a verbal. Akala ni girl, sufficient na yung verbal na recording.
so
It's not.
she was not informed about that.
It's not.
Even though na-validate na the voice and everything. Oh.
So, ang mangyayari doon, if we're not able to resolve it, if they're not able to resolve it, they're not my, I referred them to someone else, no? If they're not able to resolve it, 50-50 yung hatid.
So just to recap everything na shinare mo, Kes, for our listeners. One, you have to make sure na the family is close. Like if you're starting a family, make sure they're close. Make sure na no playing favorites. You also have to make sure that you spend time with one another, find a common interest, take a trip if you have to. And you also have to keep lines of communication open but tactfully. Now, if you want to communicate to your parents na we should settle things like inheritance and succession to do it while they're healthy and lucid, try to get the message in a way na palatable for them. And the last is to leave a last will. Mm-hmm. Did we miss anything? Is there anything else na kailangang malaman ng mga Tsinoy listeners?
Can
or even
I add
non-Tsinoy
one
listeners?
thing lang?
Absolutely.
Just 1 minute.
Of course.
For those with family businesses, this is a very important tip and you really have to apply it, okay? Which is, not every child should be part of the family business.
Okay.
I think that's a very important thing that people have to accept. Not every child, not every descendant should be part of the family business. And when I say should not be part, I mean they're not supposed to be managing. Because the family business is not supposed to be a backup plan for children who fail in life. Unfortunately, what we see in society now is parents who naawa sa anak nila, kahit na hindi qualified, kahit na just doing, they would just put the son inside the family business just because he has nowhere else to go. Even though they know he's not fit to be part of the business. And that causes a lot of conflict. Kasi imagine, a son who wakes up at 10 a.m., goes to the office at 11, has lunch by 12, and then leaves for home at 3 or 4. Compare that with if he has a sibling who's at the office at 6 or at the factory at 6 and, stays until 6 p.m., 12-hour shift, di ba mag-aaway yun? For sure mag-aaway yun. So that's why parents, for the parents who are listening with us right now, understand that your business is not supposed to be a backup plan for the children who fail in life. Instead, if we want the family business to continue, and if you want your family's legacy, because it is oftentimes, connected to the business, the family business should instead get the best and the brightest among your family, not the worst. You should be getting the best and the brightest, which also means you have to pay your children very well to join the family business.
But the same principle na you want the best and the brightest for your employees,
Correct.
or to be your employees, diba dapat for the family business din. I get it. I get what you're saying. All of these insights are really valuable, and Kes, I appreciate you taking time out to share them with us here on the podcast. I learned a lot
Same.
in the last few minutes that we've spent together. And if people want to get in touch with you to consult sa Sky Law, or maybe to reach out on social media where you dispense these nuggets of wisdom on the regular, where can they find you?
Yeah, so you can we have a website, www.skylaw.com.ph. You can send us a message there. We also have a Facebook page in Skylaw. You can send us a message there also. Now, if you just want to follow us in general, we do have a Skylaw Viber community for all the aunties and uncles out there.
Nandun ba yung mga Hokkien videos mo?
Nandun.
What's the name of the Viber community?
So it's Skylaw Advisory community. So I invite everyone to join us if you're interested with our ponderings and
I'm going to do that now. So
you'll understand it. It will fly over my head.
You
for the
had
most
said
part.
won't, probably just me.
Thank you so much, Kester, for joining us here on the podcast. Again, that's Attorney Kesterson Kua of Sky Law, one of my closest friends from college. Really appreciate that you joined us here on the pod, and share these nuggets of wisdom. Kasi hindi ito yung tipong bagay na you can just talk to your parents so freely about, diba? Baka mura pang marinig mo in response.
Yeah.
So it's good to actually hear that from our generation now that we're stepping into their shoes more or less in the years to come. So if you want to follow us here on the podcast and get in touch with us, you can hit us up. It is at Now Steaming Podcast on Facebook, Instagram, and Threads. Make sure to follow the podcast as well on Spotify. Leave a 5-star rating and a comment if you like the stuff that we talk about. If you want to follow us individually, you can find our work. For me, it's at _StanC on Instagram and Twitter, at StanC on Facebook, and at Stancy Says on TikTok.
Yes.
Kim, how about you?
And for me, it's at Kimberly Mass at So Asian Comics if you want to follow me and Ced's work. Cedric, if you want to follow him as well, at Cedric C. Cheng on Instagram and everywhere else. Do drop a message. I've been receiving some messages about either a positive response on the episode or probably like suggestions. Nothing else.
Walang negative. Di naiya sila sa'yo eh. Because it's you.
Wala naman. Sa'yo may negative.
No, I don't get anything at all.
Okay.
But that's going to end this episode of Now Steaming. We really appreciate you joining us for another fun conversation about Tsinoy culture and our families in this case, and syempre yung mga family business and mana. And as we wrap up here, we'd like to leave you all with this reminder na hindi lahat ng Tsinoy
may mana.
Thank you for listening to Now Steaming. Now Steaming is hosted by Stan C, Kimberly Mas, and Cedric Cheng. Ronel Cheng is our writer and researcher. Our show is produced, mixed, edited, and mastered by the Pod Network.
The opinions of podcast creators, hosts, and guests are not necessarily reflective of the official stance of the Pod Network Entertainment, its hosts, or other network programs. The content created by the people behind the podcast is personal and not meant to harm any religion, ethnicity, group, organization, company, or individual.